next up, we have an interesting conversation around tackling disinformation in the digital advertising industry. I think our panelists are just joining us now, but for this session, we're going to have David Goddard, who is the VP Business Development at DoubleVerify. He's going to lead us through what disinformation is, how it has grown, and what can be done by the industry to help curb the spread. And he's going to be joined by Ines from IAB Europe, along with Chris Kleinschmidt, who's the head of platform sales, Samsung Ads, Clare Ritchie, who is the head of Programmatic at Mediacom, and Justin, who is Director Marketplace Quality at MediaMath. Don't forget, you can submit any questions you've got for our panelists in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So David will hopefully get through to as many of those as possible during the session. But David, I can see you're there, so I'm happy to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining today's panel and session. My name is David Goddard. I'm Vice President of Business. For those of you who don't know DoubleVerify is a leading independent platform for digital media measurement software and analytics that authenticates quality of effectiveness of digital media around the world for the world's largest brands and platforms. And I'm excited about today's panel because this panel will look into what disinformation is, how has it grown, and what can be done by the industry to curb the spread. The focus is going to be on ad placement and demonetization, the code of practice on disinformation, and the simple things that can be done by you and by the industry to help tackle it. And I will encourage the audience to participate. You've got the Q&A box as always down on the Zoom, so please enter your questions around this topic and we'll try and get some time at the end or weave your questions into the conversation today. But I'm delighted to be joined by some fantastic thought leaders in the industry around this subject as well. And I'm going to invite, first and foremost, before we jump into the questions, my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. So if we wouldn't mind going around the virtual Zoom wheel, I can see Ines, you're top left for me, so I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Ines. I'm from IAB Europe team. I'm working as a public policy officer.
Thank you. Claire, you're top. I'm going clockwise on my screen. It might be different for everyone.
Hi, I'm Clare Ritchie. I'm Global Head of Programmatic for Mediacom, working across our various global clients, strategies and activation.
Thank you very much. Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Adler-Swanberg. I'm Director of Marketplace Quality at MediaMath, dealing with a variety of different topics, including things like policy and brand safety and disinformation as part of that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Christopher.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Kleinschmidt. I am part of the Samsung Ads unit based in London, but we are focusing on a connected TV video product for, again, a service that we offer on Samsung televisions.
Thank you very much. Now, look, disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech are all terms that refer to content which advertisers do not want to be associated. Running next to harmful content can actually hurt brand equity as it simultaneously funds bad actors behind disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. But to properly avoid these types of content, it's helpful to first understand the differences between each. And a good place to start would be looking how the multiple stakeholders in the digital ecosystem define disinformation. And there was a recent exercise done by the European Commission, which is called a code of practice. And I think it'll be a great place to start to define disinformation and how the industry defined it in the code of practice. And for this, I'd like to pass to Ines, because you were heavily involved in this process as well, as were a couple of others on this. Could you walk through how we've defined it as an industry, please?
Thank you so much, David. I think before entering into the definition, it's important to take into account that the code of practice on disinformation has been an exercise, actually, with major online platforms, also another stakeholders from the AgTech industry, but also with NGOs, civil societies, research societies, and also fact-checking industry. And I think this is important because it was impulsed by the European Commission through a guidance that was actually aiming to strengthen the previous code that was released in 2018. And this guidance has been like the thing that the signatories followed to end up with the strengthened code of practice on disinformation this year that was released actually in June. And the stakeholders and the signatories actually came up with a very broad definition for disinformation that includes not only the narrow definition of disinformation, but also misinformation and also influence information operations and foreign interference. in the information space, which is, of course, as you are seeing, a very broad definition. And actually, all this phenomena was already defined in the European Democracy Action Plan by the European Commission that set a plan for the period between the 2019 and 2024. And one of the objectives to strengthen the European Union democracy has been actually tackling disinformation. And in this plan, it was defined disinformation actually very specifically, with it's actually the false or misleading content that is spread with intention of harming and actually to deceive or influence the economic or political gain, with, of course, that can actually cause a public harm, which I think the key of this is the intention behind it. And that's, of course, the line that it was followed in the Code of Practice on Disinformation. And overall, I think the signatories and the European Commission also supported this approach of choosing a broader definition, because at the end of the day, all the mitigation, the action mitigation risks that someone can take can also be applied to all other these phenomena, and at the end, overall, helping in the fight against disinformation in the EU space.
Thank you very much. As you said, many agree with this kind of definition. And one of the things that we're trying to achieve in this ecosystem is the ability to classify content with that, it falls under that banner of disinformation, obviously misinformation and hate speech as well in that sense, and enable clients to avoid it. But this is more challenging across multiple devices as well. And I'd like to take a step back, because now that we've defined disinformation, Chris, please can you share how this definition translates across the industry, and specifically how does it relate to your area of specialism at Samsung, connected TV? Because do you foresee any challenges technically for the industry to overcome and to offer that level of transparency required to identify and avoid disinformation in connected TV?
Yeah, thanks for setting me up for this, Dave. Like, I think to really say what probably doesn't even need to be said, I think it's obvious kind of that this code is something that is obviously going to strengthen the measure to reduce manipulative behavior that's happening in the digital ecosystem. And when I think about this from a connected TV perspective, it's very interesting because it's different than I think how a lot of other consumers might interpret dis or misinformation that they're exposed to in what I like to call water cooler platforms. More publishers that could be akin to like a social media platform or a website where there's a lot more kind of UGC content, where there's a lot more ability for anybody to start to spread mis and disinformation. When it comes to connected TV, it's actually very different because, again, the user experience is almost identical to linear TV. So we're talking about a curated piece of content that's basically being delivered in a video format. Now, Ines talked about this, and David, you've addressed this a little bit. A lot of it kind of comes down to, again, the quality of content that is actually being known. And there is a huge kind of burden on the platform, the distribution partner that's distributing that content, because it is curated to ensure that it is the highest quality. And this is something that Samsung's basically done from day one with our Samsung TV Plus AVOD/FAST OTT apps, connected TV services. But I think the biggest thing where it comes down to this, again, it really kind of gets down to that ability of UGC content versus that curated content. Because again, when you think about curated content like you do in linear, there really isn't that much information you can share. There's not that many signals that you can actually send out that could identify when this is happening. You might have news stations, and we might get into this topic a little bit later, you might have news stations that kind of lean one way or the other from a political perspective, but it doesn't really talk about, there's really not a signal that's being sent that could say, hey, this is disinformation that's being spread by an unauthorized source. So I think connected TV is definitely something where it can be seen, probably is a lot more brand safe and should be seen as that. But I definitely think that there are steps that could be taken to help identify that from an advertiser's perspective, to identify the content that they're asked to be running against. I definitely think that there's some improvements that could be made, but definitely I think at the high level, it's a platform and a medium that is much more brand safe than I think people probably realize.
Thank you very much, Chris. And look, I think we could do an entire panel on video level transparency and the metadata required and how it needs to be patched. So we'll pause that element of the conversation today. But I think we can all agree that limiting spread of disinformation is necessary to drive trust in a digital ecosystem. I'd like to dig into the why. So why is tackling this topic in the advertising ecosystem so important, and who is pushing the agenda? Now, I'd love to hear, we've had kind of industry stakeholder perspective and publisher's perspective. I'd love to have a buyer perspective on this, because it's the ad dollars that the buy side are putting into the ecosystem that could be potentially most impacted, or the ones that we need to help demonetize this. So Claire, if I could come to you first, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from an agency perspective, we are curators of huge volumes of media spend, absolutely huge. And as you touched on, David, our brands, and rightly, they don't want to be associated with disinformation. We all want to promote good at the end of the day. And certainly no one wants to be promoting anything that could cause anyone any level of harm on whatever kind that may be, which ultimately is what disinformation is. And I think commercially associated to that, brand equity is directly affected by consumer confidence. So we've got a world in which obviously we want to be promoting good, we want to be doing the best thing with the kind of the responsible outlook of the media pounds that we spend, and we want to be driving a good presence for our brand. But as agencies, what that translates to is being able to focus on partners and publishers who really support supply chain transparency. We can drive education for our people, for our brands, connecting both sides of the ecosystem. We sit right in the middle between supply and demand. We hold the pennies a lot of the time, but we are very interconnected with both the supply and demand avenues. And I think to your question, we are all responsible for pushing this agenda. There is no singularly accountable position in our ecosystem. We all hold the responsibility to limit the spread of disinformation and, importantly, fund responsible and factual media.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I agree with that statement. We are all responsible and need to take responsibility in this space. And Justin, as I was saying, you're in the middle between that supply and demand perspective as a demand side platform, which is critical for the delivery of these ad dollars. How do you see it, and what is the why behind tackling this topic is so important?
Right, thanks, David. Yeah, it's one of the things that's really important to understand about misinformation and disinformation is that you're actually talking about information that's causing social harm, right? Anybody who is serving as a gatekeeper in terms of controlling the monetization of ads or the dissemination of ads has a responsibility. About 2.5 years ago, when the COVID crisis hit, we were working on our purpose-driven advertising initiative, which was specifically designed to focus on how advertising can facilitate social good. And it was very timely. A lot of the advances in brand safety technology based on contextual targeting had increased. And then also you had the Black Lives Matter movement with the George Floyd killings, where the same technology was also relevant. It became very important to actually take a position on these matters because you were talking about actual social harm. And then it's a brand safety issue, not only for the companies and the advertisers that are serving the ads or buying the ads, but also for anybody who's participating in any way in the ecosystem. It's a brand safety risk for platforms themselves, whether demand side platforms, supply side platforms, or publishers. So you are handling two matters at once, both a public good and a business good, by tackling this issue.
Thank you very much, Justin, and agree. That's on that social harm aspect is critical. We've got to remember that there is an end user in all of this, and really they should be the focus of our task and improving it, because it improves our end user experience and the lack of reduced social harm there. But Ines, I'd love to come in, like, from a commission perspective that you're heavily involved in. I'm sure the why aligned with a lot of what we said, but is there anything else you can call out here with regards to the why behind tackling?
Yeah, sure. Actually, also following a bit what Justin said, I think, of course, disinformation and the fight against it has been part of the political agenda since already quite a lot of time, because the 2018 Code of Practice on Disinformation was proof of that. And after including that in the agenda of the European Democracy Action Plan, which is basically the biggest and the most important plan of the European Commission, proves that, of course, disinformation is something that matters and it's in the political agenda. And I think it's also key because I think the pandemic taught us all that disinformation is very fast evolving and can cause an actual harm to people. So that's why, and I think it's actually not gonna end only here. I think there is, of course, a lot to be done, and the code of practice on disinformation and things like today's discussion, it's only gonna be the start.
Agree. Thank you very much, Ines. And look, we've focused on why is it so important to avoid disinformation, and we're looking at the demonetization of disinformation, but we focus on the buyer perspective as well here. But looking at the other side, the publisher, I used to work for a news publisher, and I know a lot of the concerns around misinformation hang around challenging news cycles. So an approach used previously is let's avoid news. And it's critical in these challenging times that we support premium news with ad dollars. So how can we support these premium publishers, and how do we avoid these all or nothing scenarios for news? And yeah, this is open to the floor, but maybe Claire, I can come to you first with regards to a buyer's perspective. Like, how are you? It's a really challenging line to navigate. So how are you doing it from a buyer side?
It is just that it is incredibly challenging to navigate. And I think one thing we have to remind ourselves and everyone else of is that news and opinion editorials are very different. We need to be able to support factual news sources and journalism. We have to have a differentiator when it then comes to the opinion that sits around that. And granted, that's not as clear cut as I'm making it sound. There's a lot behind this, but we do have to remember that, I think, first and foremost. Programmatically, we have more levers and control in our buying than ever before. We need to use these to support here rather than the blanket shut off that we may have had previously. And I think there's an element of relying on your basics and having best practice in place in terms of if we've got appropriate brand suitability, brand safety strategies in place for our clients on a day-to-day, and we are working with that real sweet spot between AI and human optimization, we've got our inclusion and our exclusion strategies, etc. We can then be much more nimble, much more agile when it comes to the nuance that we need to face a situation that we may find ourselves in, and do it confidently, navigating through problem areas. We've had a brilliant initiative in our broader businesses as Group M recently, where we are doing just the opposite, and we are supporting our brands getting back to news rather than steering quite definitely away from it in moments of crisis, which has been very kind of uplifting and very positive to see, and I hope we'll see a lot more of that.
I like to kind of chime in on that, because I think Claire is spot on, obviously, when it comes to this. And again, I'm thinking more from a video but like specifically more linear style connected TV ecosystem, which again is just inherently a vetted source already. Like if I think of kind of the connected TV environment, a vast majority of what's on kind of the OTT apps is going to be more of your scripted types of content. And that's a very different subject. You think about anything that could be live, where there could be the opportunity to have less real-time action, it's the news channels. Think of like the events that have been happening across the world this entire year. You think of a news channel that will likely probably be the most popular channel during these times of crisis, because people are trying to become informed. And that's where I think it comes back to the publishers and the platform to ensure that the quality of content is up to snuff. And again, I think connected TV and linear TV is pretty well spoken that, again, like that's not as much of an issue. But what I find fascinating, though, is, again, Claire mentioned about the signals that are and levers that are being available. When it comes to connected TV, there's actually probably not that much from a programmatic perspective. There's a big push in the industry for different content signals. This is something where I think a lot of kind of digital buyers are really trying to figure what sort of content are they aligning their brands with in a connected TV universe, in the hopes that it's aligning with a brand safe environment that wouldn't provide an opportunity for dis or misinformation. And I think live news is probably the only part of that that could be a bit subjective. But again, like it's going to come down to, I think, the brands and the agency's POV, because they have to understand that, yeah, these live news stations could be talking about something that might not be what their brand wants to associate with. But then the risk is avoiding that altogether and losing out on the opportunity of getting the right audience that wants to be informed on those topics. So I think it's trying to drive that parallel that I think, again, it really comes down to the signals that connected TV will start to send and could start to send down the road.
Thank you, Chris. Before I jump to Ines, because I'd love to and Ines at the end of this to talk about what is in the code and what is the advice of the code. But Justin, Claire mentioned two sophisticated tools available to programmatic buyers, and I feel you're best placed to talk to that. So what can be done to support premium publishers, but also protect?
Yeah, I had mentioned before the advances in contextual technology. We, as a platform, offer our buyers many different options that are available for contextual and targeting solutions. And what's really important is to be able to use very customized targeted solutions that are very precise in terms of what they're blocking and preventing, and also allowing. So we offer solutions that include disinformation and misinformation protections through partners like NewsGuard, through a couple of different providers. We also work with DoubleVerify, of course, and we work with other contextual providers as well. And the important piece is the targeting of those solutions. We also have a platform-wide protection. We've partnered with the Global Disinformation Index, who have a very targeted approach that attempts to actually fight disinformation through an unbiased methodology. And we provide that for all of our partners, which actually turned out to be quite fortuitous. When the Ukraine war happened, it turned out that there were quite a number of sources that I think had largely gone under the radar for a lot of folks as accepted sort of news sources, but everybody suddenly was like, wait a second, these are actually purveying disinformation. And fortunately, quite a number of them were already being prevented in a very targeted way from being monetized on our platform via Global Disinformation Index. But the important thing is to make sure that the solutions are very targeted. And then also to support news, you want to promote news. Like you said, we've got NewsGuard. We also have a news marketplace. You want to do both positive and negative, but precision is key, making sure that your solutions can be very precise and targeted rather than blunt keyword blocking and things like that is critical.
Yeah, I agree. And look, it's great to hear again, like there are a number of tools at the fingertips of buyers today to enable them to protect themselves, but also support premium news. So using sophisticated tools rather than blunt all or nothing approaches is wise. And look, I only encourage conversations with your premium publisher partners to understand more about them and also how you can work with them to support premium journalism and quality journalism out there, because it's critical. But I just want to come to Ines as well, because the code of practice has been written and signed and supported by many. What did it say on this topic of supporting publishers?
Actually, I'm afraid I'm not gonna give like the ultimate solution, of course, because the code of practice on disinformation, it's everyone that was seated at the table. We're aware that there is no magic solution to this problem. There is not one solution that is applicable to everyone as well. So at the end, what the code of practice did is to set a framework of what to do to improve the environment. And one of the first things being like everyone signing up for it should have policies that tackles disinformation in place. So that's the first thing that should be done, of course. And I think it's important to extend that to the whole ad chain. And of course, the code of practice also supports that these policies are not only like the end of the chain or in the beginning of the chain, but in the before, during, and after placing an ad, which I think is very important. And the last thing I think is, of course, the set a conversation, and the code of practice on disinformation has opened up a discussion that is gonna keep going. It's not gonna end only with the signing up the code, but it's gonna keep on bringing everyone back together to see where people are at and what else can be done in the future.
Thank you very much. I just want to take a pause because we've got a couple of questions left. Look at European Commission's Code of Practice on Disinformation, but also keep your eye out. If you haven't got time, there's quite a few pages on that, but if you keep your eye out Ivy Europe as well, because we're going to be releasing a guide to tackling disinformation in the ecosystem imminently. And this will summarize much of the advice this panel is giving, and also give you some information on how you can get involved with the code of practice and a variety of other things as well. So keep your eye out for that. And I'll promote that at the end of this panel as well, shamelessly. So look, the conversation heavily been steered towards the impact that disinformation has on brands and the ecosystem. But like Claire, as you pointed out, and Justin as well, throughout this is the end user, the consumer and the society will be the ones impacted most if the spread of disinformation isn't halted. So I just want to focus slightly as who is responsible for halting that? And we've mentioned demonetization, but what role does advertising play? Ines, I'm going to come back to you. I know you finished the last question, but come back to you because I think it's summarized quite nicely, and there's a focus on demonetization in the code of practice, an entire section, in fact. Could you just chat about that, and then we'll hand around the group around responsibility and demonetization?
Of course, yeah, the code of practice on disinformation actually focuses on defunding disinformation, which I think is key. But I would say, of course, like at the end, online advertising is the one that powers and funds the content. And we have to be also aware that this free and open ad-supported internet is the one that democratizes the access to information, which is also, in fact, what makes available information to everyone. And at the end is what it's good for tackling disinformation. This access to good and fact-checked information, it's key to tackle the problem. So I think also that's why since the beginning, the European Commission has tried to get involved all the ad chain into the fight against disinformation.
Thank you. But who is responsible? Justin, I'm going to come to you first and foremost, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's very important to understand when dealing with this topic is that anybody who is part of the chain of monetizing ads or serving ads where disinformation comes into play is going to be held responsible. One can attempt to remain on the sidelines, but unfortunately what the public, activists, political bodies will not allow that to happen. It's very important to realize that even if one attempts not to feel responsible for it, the public at large will hold companies responsible. There are quite sophisticated activists who are very skillful at identifying who's funding what and how. There are political bodies who are under pressure to take action, such as the European Commission, and the public is becoming more and more educated about these issues and making buying decisions based on them. We will all be held accountable, and so it's important to address that head on and act accordingly.
I think acting accordingly and addressing it head on is a really good way to summarize it. And I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to jump to the last question. So sorry if anyone else had any other points, because we focus on demonetization as just one tactical approach that we can implement, but what more can be done? And maybe if we could just do one quick around the virtual room on this last question to head out, what more can be done other than demonetization, which is a critical component here? Who would like to start?
Happy to go. I think from my perspective, we all experience the pace of change in our industry on a daily basis, but despite that, it's easy to forget. I think best practice and approach to the spread of disinformation is no different, and we all have an opportunity to make sure we're informed. And from my perspective, where we can be actively coming up against this, away from demonetization, is creating diverse teams, representing our issues and our standards internally, and making sure that we have voices that can see all sides of the coin, so that we're not put in those positions where we are having to create knee-jerk reactions to crisis or to negativity or to things that we see in the news, because largely those knee-jerk reactions come when we don't fully understand the ramifications, or we don't fully understand the market or the region and place. So I think once we have these strategies and we have kind of people who are willing to be vocal about their feelings, it's re-evaluation. We can't sit on the practices that we have. We need to keep coming back to them. Our tools are brilliant. We've said that. They give us volumes of information so that we can understand what's going on. That also gives us the impact of these decisions. So it's our responsibility to keep going back to that impact and understanding and creating balance with our brands, with our consumers, and ultimately supporting responsible news and journalism.
Yeah, and I would just echo on that too. Again, I think a lot of this, again, when you think about the information that's being shared and passed from a programmatic perspective, signals need to be stronger, particularly from a video perspective. And these were never shared on linear TV. I think connected TV is that environment where you can start to share a lot more information in real time to help buyers understand what they're actually leaning against. But I think more importantly is actually getting the consumer's privacy at the heart of this. And again, I think this is something where, again, if I speak about Samsung and other publishers that are coming into play, having a consent management platform is actually a big step forward for us in the right direction, because we're now actually getting the consumer consent to allow us to do the third-party tracking, right, through different premium vendors. I won't mention any names, but maybe a few on this call, but working with a few partners to actually then start to do third-party tracking of that. And that's something that hasn't existed in connected TV, but I think 2023 is going to start to bring that, and it's going to allow, again, that third-party verification when it comes to understanding the content that brands are aligning themselves with.
I think, though, it's very important to have very clear policies. You have to take a position on this. It's, as I was saying, you really can't stay on the sidelines to handle it effectively. And sometimes what that means is the word we were throwing out, demonetization, which when you're dealing with business and the goal is monetization, can pose some challenging choices. And you have to be willing to stand on your choices and understand that there's a bigger picture that you're trying to facilitate for both the public good and for your business.
And I can maybe finalize with a more public policy view, which is, of course, discussions as the ones of today. I think it's a great start, because at the end, what we are doing is like voicing the concerns and the problem, which is great. And also, of course, the code of practice on disinformation, I think it's another great way, or another regional codes on the code of practice on this, the same on disinformation. And the last thing, of course, we are about to release, David was saying it, IB Europe, a guide to disinformation, that I think also is a great start, because we actually brought together different members from different sides of the ad chain to basically say what's being done, what it can be done, and also sets, of course, a great discussion or a start of a discussion.
Thank you very much for rounding off the call in such a powerful way. Look, just to summarize, we need to all take responsibility in this ecosystem. We have the tools available to us today to deliver this and demonetize disinformation, enabling the spread of disinformation to be halted in a way. And we still need to support premium publishers and quality journalism. But the first and foremost thing you can do is get educated on this and learn more about this. So do keep your eyes out. Another shameless plug for the IB Europe's guide on disinformation will be released soon, and also brush up on the European Commission's Code of Practice, because each of those has really clear guidance on how to make a difference in the ecosystem and tackle disinformation. But thank you all for listening. Thank you to the panelists. You're amazing as always. And Lauren, over to you.